So it looks like we don't have a Transformer Tuesday this week. I guess it's with the San Diego Comic-Con just around the corner. I think Hasbro's probably saving all those pre-orders and announcements and listings for that weekend. So we're going to jump in today with yet again another Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. When I was going over this question, I asked myself, did I already answer this one? But it looks like it wasn't the case. It looks like it was a question that I've probably answered a million times in person when people have been inquiring to me about this kind of stuff. And it's about us collecting and, storing in our hobby and all the actual practical stuff that is involved with being a fan of Transformers. So let's jump into that. And again, if you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon, help support the podcast. Let us know we're doing a half-decent job here in the Transformer world as my voice recovers from TFCon this weekend. Patreon.com/Protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. What does it get you? It gets your name in the end credits scroll at the end of every segment moving forward from your patronage. Gets you access to our exclusive Discord where we share deals, share lore, break the news, all kinds of stuff. There's this crazy Amazon Prime Day deals. You want to have it all in one place where you can know where to get your stuff? It's going to be in our Patreon Discord. We're going to share it with you so you know what to get and where to get it. Also, depending on what tier, you might get a little something in the mail. You might get a little present, again, depending how high the patronage is you are. Or, depending on what tier, you might get to ask the Patreon listener question. We have the Patreon listener question today from Jeff. And Jeff wants to know, got a Patreon listener question for the podcast since it came to mind while I was working on cataloging some of my collection. And it ties into what you talked about a while back when it comes to storage and protection of our figures. Can you talk about the storing of Transformers in relation to those that use batteries for their electronics? I'm sure one could easily say take them out, but I want to know why you do that and what's going on. What are the risks and cautions involved, and that. Keep up the amazing work, Jeff. Well, thank you for the kind comments, Jeff. And so I felt like for years I must have done a segment about this, but apparently that wasn't the case, and it was probably just me constantly in person with people having this conversation because, this affects more than just Transformers, but any toy line or even electronics or even something as simple as your TV remote. So it's going to be some good advice in a lot of ways for people that are unfamiliar with it, and we have it all here, and we could all learn together and have fun and explore. So what is going on exactly? So what he's referring to is, there's a lot of Transformer toys that have batteries in them in some shape or form. The very earliest ones that did have that was in Generation 1, guys like Shockwave and Omega Supreme and Skylynx and Trypticon. Those were some of the first versions of characters that kind of had those batteries in them. For some kind of either electronics or motion or something like that. And oddly enough, coincidentally, most of them were from the Toy Box company. It was a Korean company where all of those characters were imported that weren't Diaclone or Microman or Bandai stuff. But as time progressed later on in our hobby, obviously in G2, you had, G2 Optimus Prime, G2 Tank Megatron had those electronics. When you get into Beast Wars, you had Optimal Optimus that had those A batteries chilling in his backpack. And even when you jump forward into Transformers Armada, the bigger, characters had batteries, movie toys like Ultimate Bumblebee. I could go on and on and on. We don't really see it much today with let's say our more, collector oriented lines, whether it be like Kingdom and Legacy, Studio Series and beyond. But we still see it quite predominantly in the more gimmicky based lines like, larger figures in Cyberverse or even stuff like Rescue Bots that still kind of sticks around there. The odd masterpiece will have pill batteries, just to kind of have a light up gimmick or something. But we'll get into pill batteries too and everything like that. So what is going on exactly? So essentially, here's what's going on and I swear I must have had this conversation a million times. This is all off the top of my head. So if I miss something, correct me, but from what I gathered from all these years of having these discussions, essentially you have a battery. A battery has its positive and its negative, its cathode and its anode. Those two fronts and backs, and in the middle of it, inside the battery, you have the electrolyte. And when that electrolyte, it could be a dry powder, it could be a liquid acid inside, depending on the battery company. That's essentially what it is. When you put a battery into a device, and you close that circuit, that's the positive and the negative, you're closing a circuit in that device, what it does is the cathode and the anode, it's pushing electrons from the cathode, the positive, down into the anode, the electron, the negative, and it's creating electrons. It's pushing these electrons down through the negative and creating that electrical circuit in the battery. Now, it closes the circuit, meaning that now the circuit is functioning when those batteries are in your device, let's say an Omega Supreme. When the device is being used, it's doing a discharge. It's taking out the discharge from that battery. That's how a battery dies over time, because it's actually actively doing it. But even when you're not using the device, there is a very, very, very small discharge that is going on. And, despite how large or small that discharge is, a side effect of all of that is when you're using a battery and it's doing that kind of, discharging, it's creating hydrogen gas on the inside of the battery. Now, in most cases, by the time you burn out the battery and it's dead and it doesn't work anymore, that hydrogen gas doesn't have enough time to do anything inside that battery to be a problem for you. But if you have batteries that have been sitting inside, again, your Omega Supreme or any other figure, for years and years and years, and it's slowly discharging, but that hydrogen has nowhere to go because you haven't killed the battery and already gotten rid of it, that hydrogen gas, just like anything else, creates pressure inside that battery. The battery gets kind of bulbous, and it cracks, and it leaks, and that's slowly building up, gas has to go somewhere. So those electrolytes, they leak out, and when they come into contact with the oxygen in our air, it turns into that nasty, powdery kind of substance that we see on leaked batteries and on our devices. Now, this chemical reaction with oxygen makes all this leaky, dusty stuff like highly corrosive, and it destroys the battery terminals, the little coils. It also causes it to rust. The damage when it gets to plastic, it could melt it or even discolor it, depending how corrosive that battery company's electrolytes are. And it's very acidic on top of that, so don't really have it contacting with your skin, and keep it away from your eyes. Like, don't touch your eyes or your face or anything like that. If that does happen to you, let's say maybe it's not even your fault. You bought a Transformer figure from a garage sale, and there's been batteries sitting in there since 1986, or even to give a more recent example that's still kind of, way beyond battery, like even if you bought a Bumpin' Battler from the movie line in 2007, they got 2 AA batteries in those things, or not the Bumpin' Battlers, the animated ones. They got 2 batteries in there, so that's 2008, 2009. That's still over 10 years. So if you ever encounter one of those and you open it up and you see like, oh man, there's batteries in here. They've had that chemical reaction. They've leaked out everywhere. What I suggest is take out those batteries carefully. Try not to get them all over your hands. Put them in a strong, thick Ziploc bag, and then at some point go to your local hardware store, and they usually have a battery disposal unit there. Don't throw out the batteries. It's bad for the environment. Don't be a dick. You should not be putting that stuff in the waste. Bring it to a battery disposal center. There's sometimes an e-waste disposal center. There's someone in your area, usually the hardware stores are the most common, but there's somewhere in your area that gets rid of these. So just put them in a Ziploc and keep them until you could get rid of them properly for the good of our environment. And then afterwards, be sure you wash your hands, and for the love of God, don't touch your face, because that stuff is just not good. Now, how do we fix the problem after we've now put the batteries aside? So let's just say your Omega Supreme or your Trypticon has those leaky battery stuff all over the terminals. Most of the time what happens is, even though you remove the batteries and the terminals are all covered with that stuff, they won't work because there's all kinds of acid and corrosion on those terminals. There is a way to fix them, so don't worry about that. Don't just throw out, your figures, oh my God, they're broken, they don't work anymore, or anything like that. If the damage is not too bad, they can be saved. And all you need really is you just need a little bit of white vinegar, some Q-tips, some rubbing alcohol, and a toothbrush with a really strong bristle on it. That's all you really need. And, get these things because if you're a collector like me, sooner or later you're going to encounter it and you got to do this stuff. And worst case, you might need to do this for your portable radio, your TV remote, or whatever. If you have a TV in another room in your house that you never use and the remote just sits there for years on end, this might be some helpful advice so you don't have to throw out the remote because, oh my God, it doesn't work anymore. Essentially, all you have to do is take that toothbrush, use it to just kind of like scrape off all that, a dry toothbrush, just scrape off all that excess dust and corrosion that was on both the coil terminal and the main terminal itself. Take one of those Q-tips, put it in the white vinegar solution, and then just go to town on those terminals, really get in between every crevice and everything and really just get everything off of it, the negative coil side and the positive terminal. And you're going to hear sizzling. You're going to hear bubbling. Don't worry. That means it's working. It means it's getting rid of everything. And when you really, really get down to it and you finally cleaned everything, use a clean, dry Q-tip, kind of try to get rid of all that excess white vinegar afterwards. Then use some rubbing alcohol. And what do you do with that rubbing alcohol? Put it again on a Q-tip, get in there, and just kind of go over all the terminals again now with rubbing alcohol on a Q-tip. The rubbing alcohol, the whole reason for that is that it's going to clean everything, and rubbing alcohol, when it is exposed to oxygen, it dries out very quickly and turns into gas very fast. And then just for the sake of, perfectionist, then just take like a paper towel and just with your hand, with the paper towel pressing, just kind of clean off any excess that you might see lingering around of moisture. And then that's it. Let it dry off, for a bit, and everything should be fine and it should be cleaned. And you've just saved your little expensive figure. Now, keep in mind, pill batteries also suffer from this, even though they're smaller. They can be found in masterpieces like Masterpiece Beast Convoy, aka Optimus Primal, and they could also leak. It's not as bad as the larger A batteries or so on, but they could also leak. And considering how much you paid for your MPs, you don't want to take that risk. So be sure to take them out. I know you want to maybe have that cool thing. Oh, he can make his eyes glow and stuff. But I would suggest don't leave your Transformers with the batteries in them when they're on display. If you do want to kind of enjoy the gimmick or stuff, keep the batteries close aside, in a little box that you could reference every so often. And then you could go, okay, I'm going to take some photos with this, or I'm going to show this off. So you could just pull out the batteries and pop them in, show them off, and then take them out, because you do not want to leave the batteries in. You run a lot of risks, and considering how expensive some of our figures are today that do have batteries still in them, you don't want to do that. And the risks are not worth it, both from a health standpoint, from an environment standpoint, and most of all from the plastic you invested standpoint, especially with some of those masterpieces. So that's just what's happening and what you could do really about it. And I mean, luckily for us, like I said, more of the higher end kind of stuff today, they just don't go in that direction anymore, because they know that it's not, a lot of these toys, when they were made, they weren't intended to be kept long term. So the toy was bought, like an Omega Supreme in 1985, it was bought, the kid played with it for a bit, he absolutely destroyed it, and there would be no time for that battery to hit its expiring date, because the expiring date was probably like 1988, 1989. And in Hasbro's mind, by then, Transformers would be dead and they'd move on to the next property as far as they were concerned, which, at that time in 89 was already Ninja Turtles for Playmates and stuff, taking over the world. So, they weren't wrong in their way of thinking, but from a collector standpoint, we intend to keep these things forever. So there's this thing where you got to keep those batteries out of there, because you never know what's going to happen in the long run. There's some batteries that are included with some of these toys that are resilient, that just stick around forever. There's some batteries that are made of extremely high quality. And I mean, the best example was just the weekend of TFCon that just passed. Aaron Archer had a Laserbeak at his table, Transformers Armada Laserbeak, that has been sitting in storage since 2002. So 20 years, and the batteries still work and they did not bust. So sometimes the quality of the batteries are better than others, but sometimes, your simple Duracell or Energizer will break, and, that'll make a whole other mess for you that you don't need to deal with, considering you might have spent $20, $30, $40, $100 on your little plastic robot. So just something to keep in mind. I hope people could take something away from that, and, look at your collection. Think if there's something there that potentially might have batteries in them sitting, take it out, yo. take it out. You don't want to leave them in there, especially if you live somewhere that also has high climate and heat and all kinds of stuff. You run a whole bunch of different issues too that I could get into deeper, but it is what it is, and it's just a way to protect your collection and also your investment that you spend so much money on. Hope you learned something about that. And again, if you want to be like Jeff and ask a Patreon listener question, or you just want to help support the podcast because you enjoy what you listen to and you learn stuff and you enjoy stuff, and it is what it is, like I always say, if there's something that you could give back, again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. And like I always say, rock out with the robots in disguise, and I will talk to you again real soon.